Welcome back to the Business English Podcast, brought to you by Fluentora.com. This is your dedicated space for mastering the high-level nuances of professional English through real-world context and expert analysis. In the world of international relations and civil service, the environment is often high stakes and the pressure is constant. You are navigating complex geopolitical shifts, moving from being a passive consumer of security to an active architect of European stability. You are managing critical deadlines while representing your organization or country on the global stage. Take a deep breath and step away from the notifications for a moment. You are here with us now to sharpen your most important professional tool, your voice. Today's episode is specifically designed for our C1 and C2 learners, particularly those in Poland and worldwide who are ready to master diplomatic language for bureaucrats. We are exploring how Poland shifted from a Soviet-influenced state to a proactive member of NATO and the EU. We'll look at how they rewritten the bylaws of the club through a dual-track strategy, building hard infrastructure like the 3Cs initiative and mastering the soft power of engineered language. Now, you might think, I already know how to be polite in a meeting. But today, we are moving beyond basic politeness into the diplomatic code. We are learning the art of strategic ambiguity and how to turn a catastrophic argument into a frank exchange of views. We will explore how to champion vital policies like energy solidarity, treating the gas grid as a collective defense system with absolute precision. In diplomacy, the choice of words has a significant impact on outcomes. We will examine how the passive voice is used to sterilize conflict and how reported speech protects your credibility when navigating red-line security tripwires. This is an advanced session, so the language will be rich and the concepts sophisticated. We will keep the analysis clear and grounded in strategic realities from the master switch of energy coercion to the software update of the Eastern Partnership. Stay with us until the end of the episode. Following our main analysis, we have a specialized section on nuanced conversation starters and bridge-building diplomacy. That part is vital because the challenge isn't just having the facts, it's knowing how to introduce them without triggering a breakdown in communication. We will provide you with the exact openings used by seasoned diplomats to sound authoritative yet collaborative. Later, in our word tour, we will slow down to explain the best phrases from today's conversation like migration instrumentalization and diversification of supply sources so they stay in your memory for immediate use. Listen for the strategic story first, and then we will help you collect the language. Your progress doesn't end here. To continue advancing your English skills, click on the next video or explore the additional resources we've thoughtfully selected for you. Now, let's dive into the geopolitical heart of Europe.
Right? I mean, maybe even a little validating.
Right, yeah, it sounds very professional.
But in the secret language of geopolitics, they basically just threatened you. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we constantly see these high-stakes negotiations on the news, right? Like, for you listening, we always picture the generals, the massive mahogany tables, the treaties being signed.
Yeah, the classic photo ops.
Exactly. But behind closed doors, international relations is far less about, moving physical tanks and actually far more about the incredibly subtle, incredibly dangerous manipulation of vocabulary.
Oh, absolutely. It is a total semantic battlefield. The line between, international stability and just total crisis often doesn't rest on a military maneuver at all.
Right.
It rests on a single, meticulously engineered euphemism. And surviving in that landscape requires an absolute mastery of the code.
Which is exactly what we are decoding today. We've got a fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. It's essentially an advanced fluency curriculum designed for bureaucrats.
Yeah, it's like a textbook for survival.
It really is. It acts as a masterclass in two distinct parts. First, we're looking at a real-world case study of high-stakes geopolitics through the lens of Poland's foreign policy over the last few decades. Like, how do you survive when you are situated at the absolute geopolitical crossroads of Europe?
It's a tough neighborhood.
Very tough. And second, we are opening up the dictionary. We are translating the secret code of diplomatic language to understand what is actually being said when the cameras are rolling.
I think the overarching theme here is survival in an era of really complex intertwined threats. Navigating this requires two very different skill sets, and they have to work perfectly in tandem.
Okay.
You need the hard strategic foresight to build regional alliances, secure your energy grid, and deter military threats.
Right, the tangible stuff.
Exactly. But you also need the precise, flawless phrasing of a press release to manage the fallout. You cannot effectively deploy the hard power without the soft power of language shielding it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to start with the geopolitical sandbox. The case study of Poland is fascinating because their strategic outlook completely resets in 1989.
Yeah, total blank slate.
Right. For decades prior, sitting right there at the heart of Europe meant being subject to the dominance of the Soviet sphere of influence. When they finally regained full sovereignty, they had to rebuild their entire geopolitical posture from scratch.
They did.
And they ultimately anchored themselves to NATO in 1999 and the EU in 2004. Now, joining those institutions makes sense. It's basically like moving into a volatile neighborhood and immediately joining the neighborhood watch, you know?
That's a great way to put it.
But looking at the trajectory of their policy in these sources, they aren't just trying to get into the club for safety. They were actively trying to rewrite the bylaws of the club once they have a seat at the table.
What's fascinating here is that they absolutely are doing that. From the very moment they joined NATO, Poland wasn't content to be just, a passive consumer of security.
Right, just hiding behind the bigger countries.
Exactly. They championed this aggressive open-door policy. They wanted to pull other historically vulnerable nations in behind them.
But I guess my question is, doesn't that inherently increase the risk for the existing members? Like, why push to expand the perimeter if it just creates more borders to defend?
Because expanding the perimeter is a deliberate mechanism to destroy that old spheres of influence logic.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the old Cold War model basically dictated that massive superpowers naturally got to dominate the smaller nations around them, right? They treated them as buffer zones.
Right, like chess pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Poland's advocacy for an open door fundamentally alters that map. It establishes the precedent that sovereign nations have the actual agency to choose their alliances based on shared values.
So they aren't just default chess pieces relegated to a superpower's backyard anymore?
Precisely. And it stabilizes the entire Euro-Atlantic area by erasing the gray zones where conflict usually sparks. If you are clearly in the alliance, you aren't in a gray zone.
And they back this up structurally, too, which I found really interesting. They host multinational NATO battle groups. They consistently hit that strict 2% GDP defense spending target.
Which a lot of member states famously struggle with or just totally avoid.
Yeah, exactly. And they are also heavily focused on adapting the alliance to cyber and hybrid warfare, because they recognize the neighborhood watch is totally useless if you're only looking for burglars hopping the physical fence while someone is simultaneously hacking the alarm system.
Yeah, that's the modern threat landscape.
Yeah.
But let's look at how they construct their bilateral and regional frameworks, because relying solely on the massive NATO umbrella just isn't enough.
Right, you need specific backup.
Yeah, so they cultivate a highly strategic partnership with the United States. Specifically, lobbying for a rotating U.S. Armored Brigade combat team to be stationed on Polish soil under the European Deterrence Initiative.
Okay, but I found it really interesting that alongside lobbying for the Armored Brigade, they spent years aggressively pushing Washington for visa waiver liberalization.
Yeah, they really did.
Why prioritize tourist and business visas with the exact same intensity as military hardware? That seems weird.
Well, it cements the alliance on a human societal level. A military presence can be temporary, It could be withdrawn by a new administration after an election.
Right, the political winds change.
Exactly. But if you deeply integrate the economies, if your citizens are freely traveling, doing business, and studying in each other's countries, you create an incredibly dense web of interdependency. The soft power of social integration makes the hard power of the military alliance far more resilient to political shifts.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense. You anchor the relationship in the population, not just the Pentagon.
Exactly.
Now, managing the Americans is one thing, but they also have to manage their immediate European neighbors. This brings us to the Weimar Triangle. That's the cooperative platform between Poland, Germany, and France. And the policy approach here is described in our sources as pragmatic cooperation.
Which, if you think about it, is a beautiful piece of diplomatic framing.
How so?
Well, pragmatic cooperation basically acknowledges a total lack of philosophical alignment. Germany is the economic engine of Europe. France is the traditional diplomatic and military heavyweight. And Poland is the crucial Eastern anchor.
Right. Totally different roles.
Yeah, and they have deeply divergent views on everything from rule of law issues to defense procurement. So calling it pragmatic means they openly recognize they are geographically and economically tethered together.
They don't have a choice.
Right. They will work together to keep the continental machine running, even if the gears are constantly grinding against each other.
And because of that grinding within the Weimar Triangle, Poland didn't put all its eggs in the Western European basket. They've been highly active in building regional coalitions on the eastern flank.
Yeah, they've been very busy there.
Like the Bucharest Nine, or B9, which acts as a unified voice for the eastern NATO states. But the one that really caught my eye mechanically in the text is the 3Cs initiative, or the 3SI.
Oh, the 3SI is a masterclass in strategic geography. It focuses on the Baltic, Black, and Adriatic Seas.
Okay.
If you look at the historical infrastructure of Europe, like the railways, the highways, the pipelines, for decades, they were predominantly built on an east-west axis.
Right, crossing straight across the continent.
Right. During the Cold War, that facilitated Soviet control.
Hmm.
After the Cold War, it facilitated integration with Western European markets. But an exclusively east-west grid leaves you highly vulnerable to supply chain disruptions or pressure from either end.
It's like living in a town where the only two highways go to a massive city to the east and a massive city to the west. If either of them sets up a toll booth or closes the road, your town just starves.
Precisely. So the 3Cs initiative is about building north-south interconnectivity. It's laying down new fiber optic cables, rail lines, and gas interconnectors straight down the spine of Central Europe. It changes the economic center of gravity.
Yeah.
It creates an independent logistical zone that makes the entire region far more resilient to external pressure.
Which provides a perfect transition into what is arguably the most critical pillar of this entire geopolitical strategy.
Yeah, the energy aspect.
Right, because we've talked about military deterrence, tanks, troop placements. But an adversary doesn't need to roll a tank across your border to cripple you. They just need to turn off the heat in January.
Exactly.
Energy security is Poland's absolute paramount priority within the EU, according to the text.
Because energy reliance is the ultimate political leverage. Modern economies, critical infrastructure, hospitals, logistics, none of it functions without power.
Yes.
If a single external actor controls your primary energy flow, they possess a master switch. It's a form of coercion that doesn't trigger Article 5 of NATO.
Oh, right, because it's not a military attack.
Exactly. You can extract massive political concessions through the mere threat of throttling a pipeline.
And Poland had been sounding the alarm on this for years, specifically regarding the over-reliance on Russian natural gas via the Yamal pipeline and the subsequent Nord Stream projects.
They were very vocal about it.
Yeah, they pointed to the Russian-Ukrainian gas crises in 2006 and 2009 as empirical proof. During those disputes, gas supplies to Europe actually dropped.
Yes, significantly.
So my question is, if the pressure drops were physically felt across the continent in 2006 and 2009, why didn't the rest of the EU immediately pivot alongside Poland? Why the hesitation?
Well, from Warsaw's perspective, this was an existential vulnerability that required an immediate unified response. But from the vantage point of Western member states, particularly Berlin, the calculus was completely different.
How so?
Historically, Germany had long pursued a policy predicated on the idea that deep economic interdependence with Russia, specifically through energy trade, was actually a stabilizing force.
Yeah.
It was the concept of Wandel durch Handel.
Which means change through trade, right?
Yes, change through trade.
So they viewed projects like Nord Stream 2, which piped gas directly from Russia to Germany beneath the Baltic Sea, entirely bypassing transit countries like Poland as a primarily commercial venture that bound the nations together peacefully.
Exactly. They saw it as a peace project, basically. Whereas Poland viewed any infrastructure that concentrated supply from a single external actor while bypassing the transit security of Eastern Europe as an inherent geopolitical weapon waiting to be used.
And I think it's important to note here for our listeners, we're not taking sides on whether the German or Polish approach was morally right at the time. We're just impartially conveying the geopolitical tensions that the source text outlines.
Right. We're just looking at the strategic blueprints they were operating from.
Exactly. And rather than just objecting, Poland actually tabled a highly specific, multi-pronged blueprint for a European energy union. Let's break down the mechanics of this, because it's brilliant.
It really is.
First, they proposed joint purchasing mechanisms.
Right. This is the application of a monopsony, a single buyer against a monopoly.
Okay, explain that.
Well, If every European nation negotiates its gas contracts individually, the supplier can dictate terms, exploit price differentials, and play countries off one another for political favor.
Because they're all competing against each other.
Exactly. But if the entire European bloc negotiates as a single entity, the power dynamic completely inverts. The supplier desperately needs the massive EU market, forcing them to accept transparent, uniform pricing.
Okay, wow. The second part of the blueprint was hard infrastructure diversification, building the physical off-ramps. They pushed for LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas facilities, which fundamentally alter the game.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
Once you have an LNG terminal, you aren't tethered to a static pipe coming from the east. You can receive tankers from the US, Qatar, literally anywhere with a port. And they also pushed the Baltic pipe, which physically connects Poland to Norwegian gas fields via Denmark.
And the third component, which is often overlooked but structurally vital, was the push for common infrastructure standards and reverse flow capabilities.
I actually had to stop and visualize that when I read it. Reverse flow. Pipelines are designed with massive compressor stations to push gas in one direction, usually east to west.
Right, and if there's a disruption upstream, the countries downstream are stranded.
So what does reverse flow actually mean mechanically?
Reverse flow means re-engineering the physical valves and compressor stations on those massive cross-border pipelines so that, in a crisis, gas can be pumped west to east.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It treats the European energy grid as a collective defense system. If one node is cut off, the network can seamlessly route supply backward to backfill the gap.
And while there was obviously friction over this vision initially, the 2014 conflict in Ukraine was a massive catalyst. It accelerated a political consensus in Brussels that energy could no longer be treated as a strictly commercial commodity.
Right, reality set in.
Yeah, it had to be viewed through the lens of continental security.
Which allowed Poland to operate not just defensively, but offensively, in diplomatic terms, I mean. They began projecting soft power eastward.
Yes, let's talk about the Eastern Partnership, the EAP, which they co-initiated with Sweden in 2009. This targets 6 post-Soviet states: Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus.
A very complex group.
Very. And the goal is deep political association and economic integration. But here is the massive caveat. They do all of this without offering immediate prospects for EU membership.
Right, that's the key.
So why string these countries along? If the goal is to stabilize them and bring them into the European fold, why not just offer them a seat at the table immediately?
It basically comes down to the absorption capacity of the European Union and geopolitical tripwires.
Tripwires.
Yeah. If you immediately offer formal membership to those 6 states, you trigger immense internal fractures within the EU regarding economic risk, agricultural subsidies, and institutional balance. It's just too much shock to the system.
Oh, I see.
And more critically, you instantly cross the reddest of red lines for neighboring powers who view those states as vital security buffers.
So it's essentially stealth integration.
Yeah, think of the EAP like a massive, multi-year software update for a nation. You are slowly aligning their regulatory frameworks, anti-corruption laws, trade standards, and democratic institutions with Brussels.
Upgrading them in the background.
Exactly. You are making their internal operating systems entirely compatible with the EU. You pull them into your economic orbit through the irresistible gravity of trade access, rather than a sudden, highly provocative treaty signing.
That is so smart.
It is, because by the time the question of formal membership is even broached, their economies and societies are already functionally European.
And to supplement that massive institutional approach, they launched the European Endowment for Democracy, the ED, in 2013. This is an agile EU-funded instrument based in Brussels, but heavily steered by Polish diplomatic foresight.
Yeah, and it operates very differently.
Right, because instead of working state to state, the ED funds grassroots civil society organizations, independent journalists, and pro-democracy movements directly. I sort of liken it to a startup incubator, but for democracy.
That's a perfect analogy, because it bypasses the massive bureaucracy. Traditional diplomatic funding can take years to deploy due to red tape.
Right.
But if independent journalists in a restrictive regime need server space to keep publishing, or a civil rights group needs legal defense funds tomorrow, the ED acts as that venture capital fund for democracy.
They can just write the check.
Exactly. It provides that rapid, crucial seed funding. You are fostering the underlying societal values that will organically demand better governance from the bottom up.
So layer by layer, you have the military deterrence of NATO, the economic shielding of the energy union, and the soft power buffer of the EAP and ED.
Yes.
And all of these frameworks were put to the ultimate tragic test with the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
They really were. The geopolitical reality violently aligned with the threat assessments Warsaw had been issuing for 2 decades.
They were completely vindicated in a very dark way.
Right. And the institutional readiness they had been cultivating meant they could transition instantly into a frontline logistical hub.
The response was immediate. Massive military and humanitarian aid flowing through the borders. But more than just logistics, they became the primary internal advocate within the EU for the toughest possible sanctions regimes.
Because they knew exactly where to hit.
Exactly. Because they had spent decades mapping the vulnerabilities of the regional energy markets, they understood exactly which economic levers would inflict maximum systemic friction on the adversary.
Yeah, they had the blueprints.
They even began proposing an EU financing facility for Ukrainian reconstruction explicitly modeled on the Marshall Plan, and they did this while the conflict was still in its early stages.
That requires remarkable diplomatic bandwidth, honestly.
To be doing both at once.
Yeah, managing the acute tactical crisis of an influx of millions of refugees while simultaneously drafting the macroeconomic architecture for post-war reconstruction. It's wild. But the 2022 landscape also highlighted the evolution of modern conflict. The threats requiring NATO-EU coordination are increasingly hybrid.
Right, hybrid threats. This is the gray zone we talked about earlier. The sources highlight disinformation, cyber attacks, and the instrumentalization of migration.
That last one is crucial.
Let's drill into that, actually, because instrumentalization of migration is an incredibly sterile bureaucratic phrase for a deeply cynical tactic. How does that work mechanically?
It is basically the weaponization of human desperation. A state actor deliberately orchestrates the logistics, often issuing visas, chartering flights, and physically escorting migrants from third countries directly to the border of a target nation.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the objective isn't humanitarian resettlement. The objective is to overwhelm the target's border infrastructure, ignite fierce domestic political polarization over immigration policy, and drain law enforcement resources.
Because suddenly there's a crisis at the border out of nowhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It forces the target nation to either abandon its border security entirely or use force to repel civilians, both of which can be heavily exploited globally for propaganda.
It's an attack designed to fall just below the threshold that would trigger a conventional military response.
Exactly.
And navigating a landscape where refugees are used as weapons, where gas pipelines are geopolitical leverage, and where alliances hinge on regulatory alignment. I mean, it requires a profound evolution in how diplomats actually operate and communicate.
Right. The era of the aristocratic diplomat sitting in a closed, smoke-filled room, carving up the map, is completely obsolete.
We get incredible insight into this from Dr. Molinar, a seasoned UN diplomat. He gave a TEDx talk called Diplomats, Transformations in a Changing World.
Yes.
And he talks about bridge-building diplomacy. He argues that modern global challenges, climate change, globalized supply chains, hybrid warfare are far too complex for exclusive elitist models. You have to build consensus across entirely different cultures and perspectives.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the Eastern Partnership we just discussed. That is the physical manifestation of Dr. Molinar's theory. The EEP is a bridge. It acknowledges that you cannot solve the instability on Europe's eastern flank by just drawing a hard border and ignoring it. You have to actively build regulatory and economic bridges to manage the complexity before it combusts.
But bridge building sounds very idealistic, right? When you are dealing with state actors who are actively trying to dismantle your energy grid or launch cyber attacks, how do you actually build those bridges? You don't do it with hugs, you do it with highly engineered language.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Words are the actual load-bearing infrastructure of these bridges. And the diplomatic lexicon is designed with the precision of a scalpel.
Yes, the second part of our source material.
Right. The curriculum provides a dictionary of these terms, and analyzing them reveals the psychological mechanics of de-escalation.
Okay, let's do a live translation session. I'm going to read a phrase we hear on the news every night, and let's break down the underlying mechanics.
Let's do it.
We'll start with a classic. Two leaders walk out of a room, and the press secretary says, "The leaders had a frank exchange of views."
Oh, a frank exchange of views is the ultimate diplomatic euphemism for a catastrophic argument.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It means the parties were entirely uncompromising, voices were likely raised, and absolutely no consensus was reached whatsoever.
Wow.
But by calling it a frank exchange, you preserve the dignity of the office. You acknowledge the severity of the disagreement without creating a public spectacle that would prevent future meetings.
It's basically a containment vessel for rage.
Exactly.
Okay, what about when a government issues a statement saying they are expressing concern or monitoring the situation? Because I always hear that and think, well, do something about it.
It is a calculated delay tactic, and it serves a very specific purpose. To express concern is to formally log an issue into the diplomatic record. It tells the opposing party, we see the line you are crossing and we disapprove.
But it stops there.
Right. Crucially, it stops short of an outright accusation, which would demand a retaliatory action. Monitoring the situation is the holding pattern. It buys the bureaucracy time to formulate a consensus on sanctions or interventions, while giving the offending party a window to quietly back down before an ultimatum is issued.
It's the geopolitical equivalent of a yellow light.
Yes.
Let's look at the phrase to take note of, which we mentioned in the hook. The dictionary definition is simply acknowledging awareness. But the subtext is apparently very heavy.
Very heavy.
Oh.
When a diplomat says they take note of a policy or a statement, the operative omission is that they are actively refusing to say they welcome, endorse, or agree with it.
Oh, I see.
It is a formal receipt of information wrapped in cold distance. It means we hear you, but you do not have our blessing.
Okay, let's contrast that with to uphold.
To uphold is drawing a line in the sand. You uphold a treaty, a principle, or international law. When a nation states it will uphold a standard, they are committing to defend it, often implying that physical or economic consequences will follow if that standard is breached by the other party.
Now, how do all these terms interact in the wild? The source material provides a brilliant hypothetical case study of a press conference.
It's a great example.
Yeah. I want to read this statement from a hypothetical Polish official regarding a controversial new law in a neighboring country. Let's dissect it sentence by sentence.
Okay.
The official starts. We have taken note of the legislative changes in our neighboring country.
Stop right there.
Okay.
Take a note. They immediately deny validation. They are refusing to legitimize the new law right out of the gate.
Next sentence. We are in the process of analyzing the details of the new law and its potential implications.
Translation. We are currently hunting through the text for the exact legal or treaty mechanism you just violated, and we are assessing exactly how much economic damage it will cause.
It continues. Poland values its strong bilateral relations and open channels of communication with all its neighbors.
This is a velvet-gloved threat.
A threat.
Yes. They are reminding the neighbor of the vast economic and political benefits of their bilateral relationship benefits that are now implicitly on the line if this law proceeds.
Oh, wow. Then we get to the core. We believe that a constructive dialogue is the best way to address any concerns and to ensure that the fundamental values we share as Europeans are upheld.
That is the escalation point. Calling for constructive dialogue implies the neighbor's current actions are destructive.
Naturally.
But the phrase, fundamental values we share as Europeans are upheld, is the legal tripwire. They are elevating a domestic legislative issue to a continental human rights or rule of law level. If those values aren't upheld, it justifies intervention from Brussels.
And the sign-off. We will continue to monitor the situation closely and will not hesitate to raise our concerns through the appropriate diplomatic channels.
A perfectly structured off-ramp.
Yeah.
It says, we are watching you, and if you enact this, we will formally escalate this to international tribunals or sanctions committees. But by promising to use appropriate channels, we are offering you the chance to quietly repeal or amend the law behind closed doors first, without losing face publicly.
It is astonishing. They managed to threaten a neighbor with international escalation, question their European values, and demand a policy reversal, all without using a single aggressive or hostile word.
That's the art of it.
But the lexicon is only half the battle. The curriculum dives deep into the actual grammatical structures used to deflect crises, specifically reported speech and the passive voice.
This is the grammar of plausible deniability.
Let's examine reported speech. A diplomat won't walk to a podium and say, the border is secure. They will say, the interior minister stated that the border is secure.
Right.
Why insert that buffer? Why not just own the statement?
Because in international mediation, truth is highly volatile. If you are brokering a ceasefire, you cannot guarantee the promises of an unpredictable adversary. So by using reported speech, you function purely as a conduit of information. You maintain your neutrality. If the border erupts in violence the next day, your credibility isn't destroyed because you only reported what was claimed. You didn't certify it as fact.
It's the ultimate "I'm just the messenger" defense.
Exactly.
And then there is the holy grail of bureaucratic deflection, the passive voice. The classic example is replacing "we made catastrophic errors" with "mistakes were made." Or instead of "the rival faction rejected our peace plan," you say "the proposal was not adopted."
The passive voice fundamentally alters the psychology of a sentence by surgically removing the agent of the action. It completely deletes the who.
Right, nobody is at fault.
Exactly. In high-stakes negotiations, ego and personal animosity are often the biggest obstacles to peace. By removing the actor, you sterilize the conflict. The treaty was violated is an objective observation of a state of affairs. You violated the treaty is a personal accusation that demands a defensive, aggressive response.
So the passive voice basically absorbs the heat. Let's apply this. We have another hypothetical scenario from the curriculum. You are an EU official mediating a bitter trade dispute. One member state has imposed illegal unilateral tariffs on another. You need to propose a solution, but if you sound like you're barking orders, they will just dig their heels in.
Right. And this is where conditional language and the passive voice merge perfectly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say, you need to stop these illegal tariffs immediately so we can investigate. That triggers an instant defensive posture.
Right. You need phrases like, "it would be helpful if."
Exactly. You construct a sentence like, while the unique domestic economic pressures have been taken note of, it would be highly constructive if interim measures were suspended pending a comprehensive bilateral review.
That is just incredible verbal architecture. Have been taken note of. I acknowledge you are stressed, but I don't validate the tariffs. It would be highly constructive. I'm not ordering you. I'm just suggesting a pathway to a positive outcome. And interim measures were suspended, the passive voice. You aren't telling them to back down. You're just casually suggesting that the suspension of the measures would be a neat thing to have happen.
It creates a frictionless environment for them to comply. Which brings us to the ultimate philosophical dilemma of this entire curriculum.
Yes, the debate motion.
Right. The discussion section poses a brilliant debate regarding the ethics of this entire linguistic system. Is diplomatic language, with its emphasis on ambiguity and indirectness, essential for maintaining international peace, or does it simply obscure the truth and justify inaction?
It is the eternal tension between transparency and peace. Let's look at the argument for ambiguity first. We demand authenticity from our leaders, but if every head of state tweeted their unfiltered emotional reactions during a geopolitical crisis, the escalation ladder would be climbed in hours.
Oh, we'd be at war constantly.
Right. Diplomatic ambiguity is the shock absorber of the world. It provides the necessary fog for rivals to back down from red lines without suffering domestic political humiliation.
The ambiguity creates the off-ramps. But the counter-argument is equally vital. When language is endlessly sanitized, it becomes a tool to launder accountability.
What do you mean?
Well, when a government says they are expressing concern over an ongoing atrocity, the passive, measured tone masks the reality of human suffering, and it legally insulates the government from its moral obligation to intervene. Mistakes were made is basically a grammatical trick to ensure nobody goes to jail.
Which is exactly why this kind of education, this exact curriculum we are deep diving into, is so crucial for the public. The media and the citizenry have to act as translators.
They do.
If you don't know the code, you can be pacified by a press release that sounds comforting but actually promises zero action. You have to understand that monitoring the situation is often a synonym for doing nothing.
You have to listen for the subtext, for what is deliberately being omitted from the sentence.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started at the absolute macro level, examining how a nation sitting at the crossroads of Europe rebuilt its survival strategy from scratch.
Yeah, a massive transformation.
How Poland utilized the open-door policy of NATO to dismantle historical spheres of influence, and how they weaponized interconnectivity from the Three Seas initiative to reverse-flow gas pipelines to neutralize the threat of energy blackmail.
And we saw how they projected soft power through the Eastern Partnership of the European Endowment for Democracy, functioning as a long-term incubator for regional stability before the catastrophic validation of their threat assessments in 2022.
And then we drilled all the way down to the atomic level of that strategy. We saw how those massive continent-spanning initiatives are ultimately protected and executed by diplomats, deploying the passive voice to de-escalate trade wars, or using euphemisms to issue severe warnings without firing a single shot.
It really proves that grammar and vocabulary are as vital a component of national defense as an armored brigade.
Absolutely.
And this raises an important question to leave you with. We've spent this time analyzing how high-level bureaucrats use language to manage global conflict, but scale it down.
To everyday life.
Yeah. Think about your own workplace, your family dynamics, your community board. How often do you instinctively use the passive voice to avoid taking blame?
Oh, that's a good point.
When a project fails, do you say, "I made a mistake"? Or do you say, "Unforeseen challenges were encountered"? Do you express concern about a toxic dynamic without actually intervening to stop it? Are you acting as an honest, transparent communicator in your daily life? Or are you acting as an everyday diplomat, prioritizing the fragile piece of the room over the unvarnished truth?
That is something to seriously think about the next time you draft a delicate email or walk into a tense meeting. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you and always listen closely to the subtext.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of diplomatic precision and strategic communication. Thank you for joining us on the Business English Podcast, brought to you by Fluentora.com. Today, we've decoded how Poland transformed from a passive observer into a proactive architect of European security. We've explored the diplomatic code, from the power of energy solidarity to the strategic use of passive voice to maintain professional harmony. If you found today's analysis valuable, please subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to providing you with the high-level English content you need to navigate the complexities of international relations and global bureaucracy with total confidence. We have a special gift to help you master these concepts: a comprehensive C1-C2 lesson plan designed specifically for this topic. It includes the full reading comprehension exercises, listening tasks for Dr. Michael Mlinar's TEDx talk, and a breakdown of the diplomatic lexicon we discussed today. Please see the details in the description below to download your copy and take your professional English to the next level. Finally, if you're ready to put these skills into practice, there is no substitute for real-time interaction. If you're interested in one-on-one lessons with expert native speakers who can help you polish your diplomatic delivery, visit Fluentora.com to book your session today. Thank you for listening, for your commitment to growth, and for being part of our global community.